This week I'm going to be learning a Maamar from the Previous Rebbe, and I'm getting this text from the website Chabad Library, where it has some Sfarim available as text. And so this is a Maamar from the Previous Rebbe from, let's see, what is this? Tafresh Tzadik Beis. And this is for Parshas Shabbos, Parshas VeHaeir. And this Maamar is also printed in the Previous Rebbe's Contrasim, in, like it says in the footnote number 2 here, in Kuntras Yud Ches. Okay, so let's take it away. VeHaeir Eineinu b'sarasecha v'dabik libei b'mitzvaysecha. We ask in davening that Hashem should enlighten our eyes with your Torah and attach our hearts to your mitzvahs, v'yached l'oveinu la'ava l'yireh Hashemecha, and to unite our hearts that we should love and fear your name, l'nevesh l'nikolim l'nikosha l'yadamvad, and we will not be ashamed or embarrassed or stumble forever and ever. We say this in Birchas Kriya Shema. So we have to understand, Mahu Teichen Bakashas Elu, what is the meaning of these requests? Seemingly, I mean, again, like the simple way of understanding this stuff is poetic. But in Chassidus, we always like to look at the exact language and say, no, it's specific, and it's using that language for a reason, and what's the meaning of it. And seemingly the wording of these requests don't seem to match up with what we're asking, because Torah is something that's a matter of wisdom and knowledge and understanding, things like that. But the idea of seeing, we say VeHaeir Eineinu, enlighten our eyes, seemingly we can only see something physical. So what does it mean that we should see the light of the Torah, or we should see the Torah? So what's this idea that we should have clear vision, that our eyes should be able to be enlightened with the knowledge and the understanding of Torah? Seemingly it's an intellectual pursuit. We should say that you should enlighten our minds, but why do we say enlighten our eyes? So that's one question. Another question, and similarly we ask that our hearts cleave to your mitzvahs. Seemingly having a connection in a heartfelt connection is something that's a spiritual thing. That has to do with feelings in the heart, with emotions. But the mitzvahs seem to be primarily physical actions that we're doing with our physical limbs. We're putting on tefillin, we're putting on tzitzis. So what is it? What's this idea that our hearts should be attached to the mitzvah? It doesn't seem to matter how we feel. It matters that we should merit to do the mitzvahs. And so to other mitzvahs. So what's this idea that our hearts should be attached to the mitzvahs? Another question. And what is the meaning that we ask God to unite our hearts? Which is known from elsewhere in Chazal, that this is the idea that we have two parts of our hearts. We have our Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara, the good inclination, the evil inclination, things like that, and both of those should be united. Why specifically, if both parts of our heart are united, that then we will not be embarrassed, we will not be ashamed, we won't stumble. And we'll come to this highest pinnacle of serving God, that it will be something that will endure forever and ever. It will be an everlasting service where we won't have to worry anymore about ups and downs of life and stumbling and things like that. That at least one way of understanding this whole thing, it seems like the way he's translated it seems here, is that he's saying that the ultimate purpose is that la'olam, instead of saying it means forever, it should be in the world, or there should be the level of va'ed. And this is something that talks about elsewhere, this type of idea, but here we'll see how it explains it here, that there's a certain level that's described as va'ed, and we're saying that the ultimate thing is that we'll be able to bring this level of va'ed, of forever, into the world. So what is this idea that we're trying to accomplish? Ukadesh nagia el hatachlis oz hu hazeh hu ayidei mili habakashes elu v'tzarich l'havin mahu inyanim. And in order to achieve this ultimate goal, it's through first these having been given by God these earlier requests, So in other words, the Friedrich Rebbe is saying, and based on obviously a lot of other sources that explain this, he's introducing this idea that really we should understand this prayer as leading up to something, that we first need to achieve that our eyes should be enlightened to the Torah, and then we have to achieve that our heart should be cleaved to the mitzvahs, and then we have to have that our hearts is united, the two aspects of our heart are united, and then we can achieve this level of bringing VeHaeir into the world, which is the ultimate goal. So what is this whole progression, and what is this ultimate goal? Well, and to understand this, Hine Amar Razal, or sages say in Masechtas Yuma, which talks about tshuva, Gedaila tshuva she VeHaeir Eineinu. So there, Masechtas Yuma is about Yom Kippur, and so that's the main place where it talks about tshuva. And there, Chazal say that tshuva is great because it brings healing to the world. So we have a question on this. Why does the world need healing? It should have said that tshuva brings healing to the person. Why is it bringing Why is it bringing healing to the world? When a person sins and they repent, so then their connection is healed, but it doesn't seem to affect, the trees and the rivers and all that kind of stuff. VeHaeir. So those are introductions. We have our questions on this prayer. We have this introductory idea that we have to understand what's the relationship of our tshuva to bring healing to the world. And now we're going to dive in. So the idea is that the world comes from the word olam is related to the word helam, which means concealment. So the idea of the world is a place where godly light is covered and concealed. And by the way, I think the idea, the difference between mechusa and nelam, that mechusa means that it's being covered by something else, and nelam means that it's being withdrawn, and so it's not being expressed. Like the difference between if somebody explains something and they use some sort of metaphor, and the meaning is vague to you because the way or you don't know the language they're speaking, let's say, so that is something that's being covered up for you. Or if you have a teacher that decides that you're not ready to understand an idea, we're going to start with the basics, and so he says we'll leave this deeper explanation for later. He's withholding that's the idea of nelam. So I'm not positive exactly how all that plays into here, but I guess, there's two aspects, that the world is on the one hand, even when the godly light is being revealed, is being covered up because we see it through the lens of the physical world and nature, and also a lot of God's ability is not being expressed in the world at a lot of that potential. And therefore the world, so now we're beginning to answer this question, why the world needs healing, that the world is something that's concealing godliness, and we need to bring healing to it to remove that concealment and to reveal the truth. And so again, I think these two expressions of removing the cover and revealing the truth correspond to mechusa and nelam, that there's something that's covering godliness, and then we also have to bring the light down. And either way, bring this awareness. So refuah zu hu ayidei ha'adam. And so this healing is accomplished through man. Dihine isa medrash rabbah, it says medrash rabbah, dvarim perak daled. And I'm going to try to go, right now I'm just learning through this first time. I haven't learned this before. I'm learning it Lagirsa. I'm just going to try to run through it, and then I'm going to go back and try to map it out and, focus on some of these subtleties and points more, and try to then see the structure and put it all together. So right now it's just going through it, just trying to, it says this is the way you should learn a Maamar, or learn anything, you should go through it and then do it a few times. And each time, the first time you just to get the basic idea, second time to see the flow, third time to really understand it. After that, it's to remember it. Okay, so it says in Medrash Rabbah, HaNefesh v'Torah nimshala b'ner, that both the soul of man and the Torah are compared to a candle. HaNefesh, we find that the soul is called a candle, the chsiv, like it says in Mishlei, in Proverbs. Ner Havaya Nishmas Adam, the candle of God is the soul of man. VeHaTorah dechsiv sham vav, and the Torah is compared to a candle, like we see in Mishlei, chapter 6. Ki ner mitzvah v'Torah, it says that a mitzvah is like a candle, and the Torah is like either the flame or like the light of the midday. Different interpretations of that pasuk, but either way, we see that Torah is related to. I guess here he's saying that it's the flame of the candle, and Torah mitzvahs are like a candle with the flame. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God says, La'adam hazeh, to this person, Neri biyadcha v'nercha biyadi. My candle is in your hands, and your candle's in my hands. So I'm giving the Torah over to you, and it's up to you to understand it and to uncover that godliness in the world, I guess. And your candle, your soul, is in my hands, that our life depends on God. Neri biyadcha zu Torah, my candle that's in your hands, that's a Torah. V'nercha biyadi zaya nefesh, and your candle that's in my hands, that is the soul. Im shamarta es neri, ani mishamer es nercha. If you guard my candle, I will guard your candle. Im kavisa es neri, but if you extinguish my candle, ani mechabe es nercha v'chulu, I will extinguish your candle. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, God says, Im shamartam divrei Torah, ani mishamer eschem min hamazikin. Furthermore, God says, if you guard the words of my Torah, I will guard you from anything that can damage you. Mazikin can be a general term for anything that can cause damage. It can also be a specific term for like spiritual or psychological damaging things, sometimes called demons or things like that. But I think it means here the general idea of anything damaging. Benimtsa dener hanishama. If it would mean the spiritual ones, I guess the idea, it talks about elsewhere that the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, is the idea of the imagination. And so we can have all kinds of damaging imaginations of what we think is going on, and that cause us to be afraid or nervous or stressed and these kind of things. And I guess the idea is that learning Torah gives us that clarity of what's real and what's true, and we don't have to be afraid of all these things. You know, it's like the opposite of listening to the news, where they're always making everybody panicked about what could happen, making dire predictions and things like that, and only talking about the negative things. So this is like, if it's a spiritual thing, that's the idea, but we'll see. So it comes out that the candle of the soul and the candle of the Torah are dependent on each other, interdependent. Im shamart es neri, the shmiras haTorah hi aidei Yisrael shehein mishamernes haTorah. And if you guard my candle, which the idea that guarding the Torah depends on Yisrael, which we're the ones that guard the Torah, and through the Torah I guard your candle. The shmiras haneshama hu aidei Torah, that the soul is guarded and protected through the Torah. Ushneim ke'echad nikraim ner, and both of them together are called a candle. It seems like here it's saying that they're really one candle. I'm not sure if it, I mean, you could say maybe it means that both of them are called candles, but the fact that it says ke'echad implies to me that they're really one candle and they're two sides of one coin. I think that's what he's saying. That that really the soul and the Torah together as one become this candle. Let's see. The inyan haner begashmius hu b'shvil l'hoyer es hacheshach. The idea of a candle physically is something to, you go into a dark place and you need to bring light there, so you have a candle. U'kamaymer, like our sages say, mat ar deicha har becheshach, that a little bit of light pushes away a lot of darkness. So the idea of the idea of a candle and light is to expel darkness. Kain haner de Torah neshama meir mes cheshach ruchani. So too, on a spiritual sense, this candle of the Torah and the soul brings light and lights up the spiritual darkness, which I guess is the idea of misunderstanding and confusion and things like that. Medrash Rabbah, like it says in Medrash Rabbah on Shemais Perek Memches or Parsha Memches. Lift your eyes up and see who created all of these, which elsewhere says that Umar Meinechem is Shema, this idea of contemplating godliness, looking up at the world and seeing where it came from, that God created it. In the merit of who were these things created, were all of the things in the heavens and the earth created. So you should look and see in whose merit they were created, and in whose merit they continue to stand. And so this medrash, usually when we say lift up your eyes and see who created all of these, we're seeing that you should recognize God as a creator. But this medrash is saying that you also need to recognize the idea of what's the purpose of creation, that we have to look at the world and see it as, like the way I understand it and like to phrase it, is that Torah wants us to look at the world as a tutorial, and the whole reason it's created is for us to learn certain lessons. And so it's in the merit of Eilish Shmais B'nai Yisrael that these are the names of the children of Israel. So in the merit of Yisrael, that's why the heavens and the earth were created. and they both were created, and they continue to endure. Ve'ela b'schos mi ha'meimdim, and in what merit do the children of Israel continue to endure? B'schos eila ha'edus v'chuk mishpatim, in the merit of the Torah, which is the reference by the verse. These are the testimonies and the statutes and the civil laws of the Torah. So in other words, through the idea of the Torah. So we have these three elas, the ela of the verse speaking about creation, which corresponds to the ela shemais of the Jewish people, and that corresponds to the ela ha'edus v'chuk mishpatim of the Torah. So all three of those are bound up. V'hu tahamechaven b'brias ha'olam hu b'shvil Yisrael, Yisrael b'shvil ha'Torah. And this idea that the intention of creation of the world was for Yisrael, and Yisrael is to learn the Torah, which is a little bit of a strange language to me, because usually we don't say that Yisrael is there for something else, but I guess we're in this world with that mission. Maybe we'll see what the implication is. And this is what it says in the beginning. God created the heavens and the earth. The Bereshis, and this is one of the teachings of the Chazal that's brought in the first Rashi in the Torah. The Bereshis, who Beis Reshis, the word Bereshis, the letter Beis is larger, and so it's kind of read as being separate from the word, and so it's read as being two beginnings, two firsts, two Reshis. The Beis Nikraim Reshis, there are two that are called the first. HaTorah Nikras Reshis, Yisrael Nikraim Reshis, that the Torah is called the first, and the Yisrael are called the first. B'shvil Beis Elu Nivra Ha'olam, and the world was created in the merit or for the purpose of these two, for the Yisrael to keep the Torah. VeHaeir Eineinu, and the idea is the tachas hakavana. The idea of this medrash is that the ultimate purpose, brias v'eshavas ha'olam, in the creation, and I'm not sure the difference here between brias and hishavos, the creation of the world and its being brought into existence. Who sheyisrael yisasku b'Torah v'aveidas Hashem yisbarach, is for the Jewish people to toil in the Torah and the service of God, blessed be He. Maybe the difference between that Bria implies like the creation of the concept, like the invention of the concept of the world, and then the actual physical, force that's creating it to exist is the idea of the hishavos. But that's tzarich ian, if there's a diak there, or what that would be. Okay. Ukamaisha Kosav, like it says in Yeshaya Memhe Yabez in Isaiah chapter 45, verse 12. Anechi asisi eretz ve'adam alel barasi. That I have made the earth and I've placed man upon it. And the implication of this is, like he's going to explain now, Anechi misha anechi, that God's very essence, that I am, when it's God in His I am who I am. That's the expression. God's very essence, Shasisi Eretz, that I made the earth, who bishvil hanaychi avaylekecha shaman Torah. That is for the I am Hashem thy God and the giving of the Torah. So the reason that it says, so there's again two verses that have a similar construct. It says, I've created the earth, and I am Hashem thy God that took you out of Egypt, which is the beginning of the Ten Commandments. So those two parallel each other, and that the purpose of creation of the world was for that anaychi of the Torah. But VeHaeir dinis ava kadosh baruch hu lias lo yisbarach dir b'tachtenim, and this is the idea that's brought very often in Chassidus, based on Medrash Tanchuma, where it says that the reason that God created the world is that He desired to have a home in the lower realm, in the world. Ubishvil zeh hini asisi aretz, and because of this I created the earth. In order for the physical world and us people down here to fulfill that purpose of being a home to God, so in order for the world to be able to fulfill that purpose, God created man and placed him on the world. And again, when it says Adam, it refers to Yisrael specifically. And this is what it says, that I've created man upon it. Barasi, that man was created for the purpose of Barasi. The Gematria Taryag, and the Gematria of Barasi is 613, which is the idea of the 613 mitzvahs. Bechdei shekayim ha-mitzvahs asher begzeiras ritzoni yisbarach v'yis'ala nislabshu b'dvarim gashmim. That in order for us to fulfill the mitzvahs, that by decree of God's will may be blessed and exalted, his will came down into these physical things, the physical mitzvahs. Zehu nefesh v'hatayra nimshlu b'ner de'inyanei l'chayr zacheshech. And now this is the idea that both the soul of man and the Torah are compared to a candle, or as one they're compared to a candle, because the purpose of man through the Torah is to bring light to the darkness of the world. And so too, the Yisrael and the Torah together, they bring light to the darkness of this physical world, which this physical world is compared to night, to a place, a time of darkness, that naturally the world is dark. And just like in night, a person, because it's dark, a person doesn't see anything, and therefore he's able to fall into a pit or a trap, or to hurt himself on anything, right? That's just, you could bump into something because you don't see where you're going. And so you need a candle to bring light to the darkness. And again, I think the idea is that the natural state of the world is that it's very natural and easy for us to misunderstand the world and ourselves and other people and their intentions and things like that. And so if we just walk around in that natural state, we're going to not understand what's going on. We're not going to understand why our actions are causing certain things, or why things are happening to us. Both just in a simple physical sense of like understanding sciences and technology. Without that, we have no idea what causes, let's say, disease or, weather or any of these kind of things. But then also in our relationships, we don't understand ourselves and people. We don't understand why eating certain foods are going to be healthy or not. So we're not going to, why it's important to exercise. We don't understand naturally. We're just going to do whatever is pleasurable, whatever first appears to us. We're not going to necessarily appreciate the consequence of our actions. And then we're going to fall into all kinds of problems in all these different levels. And therefore we need to have this understanding, this idea of a clarity and understanding, which is to bring light to this spiritual darkness. And that gives us the ability to see what our purpose is, what our mission is, who we are, what we need to do, what we need to do to support ourselves, to support others, to have good relationships, take care of ourselves physically and spiritually and emotionally and all this kind of stuff. And we'll be able to go in a straight path and be successful in life and be happy and all these things. So hine kamay came by haza liyas olam gashmi v'chumri nikra chayshch. And so to this physical world, because it is a physical place, and not only that, it's a material, coarse material place. So gashmi, the implication of gashmi versus chumri, gashmi implies something physical where it's clear what its purpose is, like the body, where you see a person's body, but you see them as a living person, versus chumri means you're just looking at the material itself. Like I've seen, they say that like all the materials in the body would be worth, maybe $12 just for the chemicals or some sort of number like that. If you just reduce something to just its most basic matter, let's say you would go cut down some, ancient historic tree just to, make paper out of or something like that. In real life, they usually grow special trees in farms for paper. They don't just go cutting down rainforests for paper. But so, if you just look at something as just as a material, it's totally ignoring even its most basic spiritual aspects, as opposed to looking at, let's say, an animal or a tree or any of these things as having some deeper value too. So that's the idea, I think, between Gashmi and Chumri. Techayas who are, because the idea of life is the idea of light. This is lichtig, right? It's light, it's brilliant. V'Gashmi hu masha mechasu master alachais. And something physical is covering over and concealing that life force. So there's the soul and there's a life that's in something, but we don't see that directly. We just see the body. As far dekt eifter emes, dem emes, it covers over the truth. Ukumai beguf and nefesh, like with the soul and the body and the soul. Shenefesh hu chayes va'ar, that the soul is life and it's light. It's this idea of consciousness and awareness and things like that. Va'guf hu gashmi v'chayshech hamaster al emes, but the body is something that is physical and it is dark. It covers over this truth, and it makes it hard for other people to see. Like when we look at somebody else, we don't see what they're really thinking and feeling and all that. And also with ourselves, our body can make it hard for us to really understand what our soul wants. We have to learn to train ourselves to understand our emotions, to understand our feelings and our desires, and what we really need to facilitate those. Even though each person, everybody feels that my main self is my soul, my life. Nevertheless, the body, with its like urges and desires and its nature, can cover over that, and we can feel when we're hungry or thirsty or I don't know, these things, and where we have all these other kinds of needs. Those can kind of confuse us as to what's really best for us and what we really want. And if we just follow that, we'll get into patterns that are impulsive, and lead us to be, in a bad habits, and get into a rut, and eventually get depressed and things like that. There's a good book about that called, I forget it, how to be miserable. I forget, maybe 50 ways to be miserable or something like that. And it's basically looking at how if a person has bad habits, automatically they're going to be miserable. And the chumri, the material, is even more coarse than the physical. Because something physical creates a situation where it covers over the truth, it makes it concealed, it makes it a little harder to appreciate, but we still know the truth. I guess, like looking at a living thing, we see that it's alive, we see that there's a soul there, but it's still, we're able to kind of focus on the body and forget about it sometimes. But the idea of something that's chumri, that's just material, not only does it cover the truth and darken it to make it less bright, it actually makes something that's false into truth. It makes it appear, it lies to us, it makes it appear that something that's really not true is true. Because every created being didn't make itself. Nothing can make itself. And the creation of all of these creatures is coming from this godly force, which is this spirit, abstract or transcendent force that's creating the yesh, the physical things that we see. And we'll delve more into that a little later, but I guess the basic idea is that what we actually see in the physical world, we see, whatever, rocks and trees and animals and people and all these things. So there's, like, even just in the simplest sense, they're being made out of, energy, which could come into, endless forms. The fact that it's coalescing into a specific form with specific atoms and molecules and everything, and that all of these forces are coming out in a certain way to give this particular actual thing. But as far as the potential of what could be, it's unlimited, and it's totally undefined that it needs to be this way or that way. And so I think that's the basic idea, that it's coming from an ayin to a yesh. And obviously it goes far back, way before, much more fundamental than even the idea of physical energy or anything like that. That God can do whatever he wants, and this whole world with everything in it, and even the ideas of time and space and all these things are creations. Anything that's being created, a creative process, means you have to be coming from somewhere that is transcendent and that has, just like in human creativity, if you just learn how to do one thing and you could just follow the directions, but you don't really understand it, so you have no general abstract knowledge of what you're doing, then you can just do exactly what you were told. Like if you had a certain recipe and you don't understand anything about the rules of baking and cooking or whatever, you could just follow it exactly. But if I give you different ingredients, you wouldn't be able to cook something. In order to invent a new recipe, you have to understand the fundamentals of what these ingredients do, what those do, what happens if you change it, what happens if you change the temperature, how you cook it, how, if you understand that stuff, you have this more general, more abstract understanding that you can create something new. So in a similar way, to create something physical also, it has to come from this more abstract, transcendent source that gives this realm of possibility, really infinite possibilities, and then that can come out as some sort of new yesh. But if you have something that's just limited to a specific form, it's not able to generate something new. Maamar, like it says, yesh me yesh hu sheker, the idea that you can have something from something that is false. So you always have to have a state of ayin in the middle to transform from one yesh to another yesh. Like we're going to give an example in a moment. You have to revert always to that general transcendent idea, which is more fundamental and more abstract, and then it can come into another form. And therefore we see, and like we see that when you plant a seed, even though in a way you say, oh, the plant is coming from the seed, so it's not coming from nothing. You have to put the seed in the earth, and it's coming from the seed and the earth and the sun and all these things. But as the seed starts out having one form where it's meant to be like long-term storage, and in order for it to change to become a plant, it has to lose its original identity, and then it activates all these new proteins and enzymes, and it changes into a different state. In order to change to a different state, it has to first let go and lose that state, and the idea is that there's this kind of higher form that it has to connect to in order for it to make that transition. It has to connect to, like, even like the physical sense, in its DNA, it has these instructions for how to be a seed and how to be a plant, and it has to first stop being one and then transition to start being the next one. Actually, I just saw something about malting, the idea of like having malt flavors, whether it's whiskey or whether it's, in milk, they put malted flavors. It comes from taking a seed and just catching it when it's in that transition process, when it's just soaked for a few days, it just starts to sprout. So then it releases a whole bunch of enzymes to help it make that transition, and that starts breaking down the starches, because the starches that are inside of the seed are there to be a storage of energy to help it be able to grow, but those have to be broken down into simple sugars before it can start growing, and that creates this malt flavor. But again, there's this idea of that every transition requires losing what you had before and letting go of that, and then coming to something new. And that means that there has to be some sort of higher thing that connects those two processes. And in this case, there's these instructions in the DNA that connects from one stage to the next. And there's also the power of growth, which is, more general than that. That's spiritual power in the ground. And we'll, maybe look more into this stuff when we come around the second time. But okay, so so in order to grow, it has to first lose itself, and it has to connect to or be subsumed in this power of growth which God implanted into the earth. In order for the plant to grow, it needs the seed really just has the instructions for how to grow the plant, but it then is going to have to draw on nutrients and all these things. It's going to have the sunlight and the temperature and the microbes and the right pH, the right acidity level. There's all these different factors have to come into place. And when all those things are in place, that creates an environment that gives the potential to grow any plant. And then this seed can then channel that into growing a specific plant. And so that's this idea of connecting to this ion in between, because on its own, just the seed on its own, it could sprout and it has enough energy to just grow a little bit, but then it would just die. It needs to be able to find a way to connect through its roots and all these things and create this system that it's now going to be able to connect to the power of growth in the ground, and then it can transition into being a plant. I think that's the idea. The same thing with every creation and everything being brought into existence. It's really coming, there's a godly force that is from the 10 utterances in the beginning of creation, where God set in certain forces into the world, and those are something that are these abstract forces that just like the same pot of dirt could grow any plant, and you put a certain seed, it channels it into that specific plant. If you're going to grow a tomato or a cucumber or whatever it is, but it's really it has to really tap into these fundamental forces that God put into nature, and then it can grow. And that's really the way it is, that anything that's, even though it seems like it's coming from the seed is what's growing, no, it's not. The seed is really giving the ability to tap into those fundamental things that are already put in place. And the same thing, with everything that we're doing, if God didn't give us the ability to be conscious and to understand and have minds and hearts and all these things, we wouldn't be able to accomplish anything. So all of our human accomplishments are really just us being able to tap into those things that God gave us, the ability to understand and recognize patterns and learn and all these kind of things. And the same with everything going on in the world. And so too with every single creature, its life, the life of every creature is coming from this godly force that God implanted into the souls of those things and into the different mazoles. So mazoles sometimes means constellations, but here it means the different channels that channel these different forces to the inanimate objects, to the plant life, and to the animal life. And so each thing is tapping into some of these forces in different combinations, and these fundamental godly forces are what's giving it its life and making it grow and making it exist. It's not just coming from the physical thing itself. And from this godly spark that God implanted in every soul, so every soul has in it this godly spark that gives it the ability to be alive and to have consciousness and all these things. The inanimate plant and animal physical life, and so to the body of man, and so the bodies, like we spoke about before, a body is something that's gashmi, it's not actually chumri, it's not just the material, it's been built up to be, clearly the body is a vessel for the soul, and so when it's in that state, that's called gashmi. They cover over the truth. They don't contradict the truth, they don't deny the truth and say something false. But the material things, but like inanimate objects seem to just, give us that we don't see the life in them so much unless you really look into it and appreciate that really even inanimate things are being driven by these godly forces, and they have that spiritual side to them. Naturally, we just look at them as just these things lying around that are just there for us to use and manipulate. And the same thing, if a person debases themselves so that they start viewing themselves and others just as objects, so then they can also have this state of being chumri and have, their body proclaim to them things that something that's false is really true. And yeah, we'll look more into try to find some examples of these specific examples of all these ideas when we go back and take a look at this again.